War pirates, yes, they're rabbi, sold out to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation.
Credit to the kinds of ways that they developed to build elegant houses, for example, with the Egyptian peasants using the soil under their ground, new ways of cheap literacy advancement for Brazilian peasants. Some of you may know Paulo Freire's great work here. But by and large, what the multinational corporation model has achieved is a way to dominate our lives and to plan our tax system, our transportation system, to plan our communication system, and to plan our educational system, and to plan our consumer market system, and to plan our childhood entertainment, commercialization of childhood, to plan our health system, speaking of the United States especially, and to even plan our genetic system. I mean, they are planning to control and shape these. And not by just saying, well, we're going to do it by having the best product in a competitive market. No. They engage in collusion. They engage in conscious parallelism. They engage in open joint ventures now. The antitrust laws don't disrupt those. And most important is they control government. They control government to favor them, to provide subsidies for them, to bail them out, as the government bailed out General Motors. They control government to deregulate, not to set mandatory safety standards, not to empower consumers, not to give awards to innovative companies, not to deal with government procurement, which can specify what government buys, which they buy everything we buy, plus missiles. And they buy food and clothing and machinery and transportation vehicles. All these things are subject to be blocked again and again because centralized corporate power has to have centralized government power. So they don't even want the states and the localities to have the authority. They would rather centralize it in Washington, D.C. Now, when we tried to get airbags in cars, for example, we couldn't get the Department of Transportation to issue mandatory airbag standards because General Motors controlled the Auto Safety Agency, which I helped create. It was brought under GM, Chrysler, Ford. So we went to the General Services Administration, which buys 50,000 cars a year for government employees, and persuaded Ford. So we went to the General Services Administration, which buys 50,000 cars a year for government employees, and persuaded them to establish specifications for 5,000 airbag-equipped cars. And that's what started the whole ball rolling, and Detroit decided that they had to do the same thing, because people's lives were being saved, people were being asked, why aren't you doing this? Ronald Reagan was no longer able to convince people that the airbag was an obstacle to human freedom, because I redefined it for him. I said, you mean the freedom to go through a windshield in a crash. So it's important to keep in mind, because a lot of people in the States who call themselves conservatives, they think there's a real distinction between government and big business. They think there's a real distinction between Wall Street and Washington, even after 2008, when there was no distinction. Wall Street went to Washington and said, save us, you will. You see, socialism rescuing big capitalism in this way. And that's very important, because if we don't make that distinction, if we don't have arm's length relationship, we can't have a democratic government. It's not possible. Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1938 sent a message to Congress urging successfully to set up an investigative commission on corporate power. And in the message he said, whenever government is controlled by private economic power, that's fascism. 1938. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so we have to be very careful of that. Now, in your history, you have quite an interesting history compared to ours. you were very poor 200 years ago or so, but about 100 years ago or so, you decided that there were going to be two returns to the people of Sweden. They're going to get a return from their salary and wages, and they're going to get a return from the community betterment that they helped build in their work. And so they had a private return in the salary, and they had a social return. And in the social return, you've established a standard of living that has essentially abolished poverty, as we know it, in the United States. And for all your people, you have health insurance and paid daycare and maternity leave and family sick leave and tuition-free education and decent public transit by comparison with the U.S. Paid vacations, I don't know what you do 7 weeks a year. Right? Paid vacations for all the people. And we don't have any of this for all the people. I mean, we won World War II. And Europe was destroyed. We didn't have any of this because of the destructive ideology that the free market was the best system and it was going to take care of everything. Even though it wasn't a free market. In the 1930s, General Motors decided there was only one competitor to the auto industry that had to be dealt with. It was the trolley system. And so they collaborated with a tire company and an oil company and bought up the trolley systems, the electrified trolley systems, in 28 major metropolitan areas, including the biggest one in the world at that time in Southern California. You could go like 50, 60 miles on an electric trolley. They bought them up, ripped out the tracks, and pushed the state and federal governments to expand the highway system in order to have a monopoly, in that sense, for oil, petroleum, tires, and motor vehicles. The Department of Justice indicted them for criminal violation of the antitrust laws. They convicted them in Chicago, in federal district court, right after World War II. And GM was fined for what some economists call the crime of the century, $5,000. But the damage was already done, and today, and yesterday, and tomorrow, congested highways, wasted time, avoidable accidents, breathing polluted air are the fate of tens of millions of American commuters. Now, is that free market capitalism? You see, there are so many ways that giant corporations can crush smaller business, can indenture it, can engage in predatory practices, and in so many ways they can make a mockery out of the so-called free market system. But the ideology still sticks in the heads of people who actually believe that there's such a thing in so many areas. Now let me just run through a few concepts that have helped us in understanding giant corporate behavior. One is we developed the concept of institutional insanity. I once addressed a convention of psychologists and I said, I have some more business for you. Instead of just dealing with individual mental health problems or individual insanity, why not try out General Motors? Why not try out the Pentagon? Why not try out these large institutions that behave in a way which if we apply human values as we do to each other, neighbors, friends, if we apply those same values to these giant institutions, they would be considered clinically insane. They would be dysfunctional. They would be